Hi everybody. So today, a very different one. As you might have not guessed, but seen from the title, I have an announcement. I am pregnant, and I'm not even just a little bit pregnant. 30 weeks and 6 days, I think we are, and I realised that I vanished from here. I stopped making videos and I didn't upload very much to Instagram or anything like that for quite a long time. And I thought, anybody who follows me on Instagram, I haven't hidden the fact that I'm pregnant. I didn't say anything about it until we were about 4 months, I don't think. But I thought long and hard whether to make a video about it. And then I realised that along the way I have searched so many times for YouTube videos for specific things that we have gone through, and I didn't always find them. I didn't always find the answers, so I thought I'd make one because if I could just reassure one person or let one person know that other people were in the same boat, what are you doing? Then, it would be worth it. It would definitely be worth it. We found out that we were having a baby when did we find out? I think it was May. When we found out, we were about 5 weeks pregnant. So we were ecstatic and we told our family, but nobody else. We told our friends quite close afterwards because they'd have wondered why I wasn't, I don't know, smoking or drinking. Not that I drank much anyway, but they'd have wondered, so we told them quite quickly. And I didn't really know how to go about it, so, never really doing it before. So I called my doctor and I said, hello, I'm pregnant. I don't really know what happens next. So they put me in touch with the proper midwives and that was all fine. And then I went to see them, I think when we were 8 weeks, I think. And I met one midwife and she was lovely. I didn't meet my actual midwife until very recently. I think she was away quite a lot, or poorly, I'm not sure which, but yeah, we were told about everything. I did a lot of reading anyway. I mean, I think that's what you do now, you Google stuff, sometimes too much. So all of that was fine, everything was fine, and then round about 6-7 weeks I started to feel sick, and I was expecting it, but I wasn't expecting to feel so sick, and it was all the time. It was, the best way that I can describe it is like being hungover, like really seriously hungover, 24/7. I couldn't keep anything down. It was just, and once I started being sick, I couldn't really stop. It was horrendous and I felt like it was never going to go away. Ignore the dog. Yeah, so I just felt like it was going to be permanent, and even worse than that was my sense of smell. I could smell everything. At my day job, whenever people came in, I could smell them. I remember somebody came in, a gentleman, and he smelled really strongly of like fabric softener, like really clean and nice, but I hated him. I hated him with a passion because he smelled so strongly and it made me want to cry because I wasn't telling work until I was 12 weeks, like you're supposed to, but just I could smell smoke on people. I used to smoke, I stopped as soon as we found out, but I could smell smoke on people and I hated it. And even just boiling water with a tea bag in smelled like rotten meat to me. And that lasted for 7 weeks, that sickness, and it was constant. It was relentless, really. So that was pretty bad, but it, you know, you get used to it, really. The next thing that really happened, I'm kind of jumping about, but we had our 12-week scan, which was really, really exciting. And I'd been told very briefly beforehand by the midwife and asked if we wanted the screening for Down syndrome. Now, I'm sure that this was explained to me properly, but for one reason or another, I had it into my head that it was a diagnostic test. I thought you'd be told one way or another, basically. And I know a lot of people choose not to have it, and if I was to go through this again, I would choose not to have the screening at 12 weeks. I just wouldn't do it. But I thought, me and my husband thought, that if our baby did have Down syndrome, we would want to know so that we could be prepared. We wouldn't do anything differently. I'm not judging anybody who would, but we wouldn't do anything differently. We'd continue with the pregnancy. It's just, I think it's a useful thing to know. So we went for our scan, and one very upsetting thing was, from the very beginning of this, I felt slightly detached. Not anymore, but slightly detached. So it's quite difficult when, I'm sure some women feel immediate bonds with their baby. I didn't really believe that there was one in there. I was almost convinced that there wasn't. But when we got to the scan, I lay down and immediately the screen was turned away from me. And I never ever saw the baby on that scan. My husband did, and he informed me that he was wriggly and jumping about. I never saw anything. The screen was never turned round to me. I found it quite uncomfortable as well. And I left feeling happy because my husband had seen him, but very, very disappointed that I hadn't, because it was like I was left out. I feel teary. It was like I was left out of this big important thing. And I'd read a little bit about doing the measurements at the back of the baby's neck for the Down syndrome test. And I asked the lady who was doing the ultrasound, I was like, does everything look okay? And she said, oh yes, but she seemed to be having some difficulty because he was really wriggly. A wriggly little baby. I've let the cat out of the bag. He was really wriggly. So I had my blood taken afterwards as well, and that was to contribute to the test. And everything was fine. We went off with some very, very blurry pictures, but pictures nonetheless. He looked like my granddad in the pictures, which is ridiculous. He's just really skinny, and but they were blurry, and I did feel like I'd lost out a little bit. I feel like I'd missed out. But we showed our family, and we were very, very excited. And then a little while later, I was at work and I had a phone call on my mobile. And I didn't know who the number was, so I didn't answer it. And then they called back and left an answer phone message, and they still didn't say who they were, but it was like a local number, and said, can you call us back? So I did, and I went into the office, because I work on a reception. I went into the office, and the lady on the phone explained that she was from the hospital, and she said to me, you've screen tested positive for Down syndrome. So, and then she said, are you on your own? To which I went, yes. Now, it took her a good 10 minutes to explain that didn't mean that the baby definitely had Down syndrome, but being told immediately, without any kind of, are you with somebody, are you comfortable, like, we've got some, just immediately, you have tested positive the screen tested positive for Down syndrome. So I kind of collected myself enough to ask what the chances were, because I knew that by that point I knew that there were chances, and she told us 1 in 19, and she asked if we could go to the hospital. So I kind of just left, you know, called my husband, said oh, this is sad. Said, get ready, I am sorry. Explained what had gone on, and you know, told him to get ready. I was going to go pick him up and we were going to go to the hospital. Anyway, so then I called my mum, and my mum was as sensible as ever, and she said, you can get an amnio. And I knew roughly what one was, and I said no, because I knew that there was a risk of miscarriage, and that risk, however small, I believe it's 1% now, just seemed too big. And again, I'm not judging anybody who does get one, just to me personally that risk seemed too big. Anyway, I collected my husband, we drove to the hospital, and we were taken to what I can only, it was almost like grief counselling. We were put in a room with very comfy chairs, given some leaflets, and the leaflets, whilst I'm sure are non-biased, they seemed very gloomy to us. You know, like figures about the percentage of Down syndrome children who die before the age of 5 and heart conditions and all of this. So it seemed very gloomy. A lady came to speak to us and she was very, very nice. But I think regardless of however reassuring she could have been, it kind of, that was in our heads at that moment, as she told us that the options. She said about an amnio, and I said I am not interested. But the thought of going through the next few months and not knowing was absolutely hideous. And right before we left, she told us about something called the harmony test. She told us it was quite expensive, different places that did it, and she told us it was a non-invasive screening test for Down syndrome, but it was a lot more accurate than the NHS one. But that they had to take some blood and it would be sent off to the States, because we don't do it here apparently. So we got home and that's what we started looking into, and we found a company called Babybond in Hull in Chester, if you're interested, and they do all sorts of scans for pregnant ladies, and they do other stuff. They do other scans for men and for women, but scans for pregnant ladies, pictures of babies, 3D scans, 4D scans, and they did this harmony test. I believe it was around £500, but we booked in because the stress of not knowing, and again I just really want to make it clear we wouldn't have made any kind of different decision, but we needed to know because the stress of not knowing was agonising. So we booked this test. I think it took about a week, maybe a bit longer, till we could go there, and that was a long wait. Again, because I hadn't told anybody at work, I felt like there was a cloud over my head. And my husband was very, very, not positive, but he was very reassuring. My husband was very reassuring, basically just pointing out that however our baby came out, we would love him and he'd be amazing. So we went to the Babybond place, and I will put all of the details of them in the description because they're incredible. The lady who was on reception, she was also the phlebotomist. I think that's the right word, the lady who takes the blood. She was, again, they weren't reassuring in that they weren't telling us that there was no possibility that our baby would have Down syndrome. But they were calming and they were efficient, and they seemed, obviously this was private, and I'm not bashing the NHS at all. I understand that they have their problems, but it was a very, very calming, reassuring, efficient atmosphere, which is what I needed really after the way that things had been dealt with before. We were taken into a room, and a lovely lady did another scan on us, and I got to see our baby for the first time, and on a big screen on the wall. It was all very comfortable, but I could see him on a big screen. There was no turning a screen around to me. This was the first time that I'd seen him. So I got to see him, I got to hear his heartbeat, which was lovely. We got to see him in 3D because she clicked onto 3D for us, which my husband didn't like because babies do look a little bit peculiar when, you know, when you're only about 13, 14 weeks gone. But it was very, very reassuring to me. She went through everything. She did the measurements at the back of the neck, and they were considerably smaller than the measurements that the NHS had done. But she showed us everything. She showed us that he had a nasal bone, which is not a solid indication, but a lack of a nasal bone is an indication of Down syndrome, I believe. I don't want to get anything wrong, but everything, she showed us everything that she could have done, explained everything that she could have done, and I felt very reassured. And then my blood was taken, and they were generally just really, really kind to us. Blood was sent off, and I was told that it could be up to 2 weeks. So the next few days were a nightmare. I went between reassuring myself that everything was going to be fine, whatever happened, to absolutely knowing that our baby was poorly. Oh, before I go on, part of the blood test, they can tell you what gender your baby is, and they asked us whether we wanted to know that, and we opted for a yes because we thought some kind of news on the gender might soften the blow of anything else. So after 10 days, I called them because I was just frantic, and I knew it was supposed to be 2 weeks, but I called them and they said, no, your results haven't come in yet. And I just nearly collapsed with desperation to know. And that night I got a phone call, and I was standing upstairs by myself. My husband was downstairs, and the lady called me and she said, would you like to know? And I was like, yes. I sat on the floor, and she went through a bit of stuff with me which I can't remember, and then told me that the probability of our baby having Down syndrome was 1 in 10,000, which was vastly different to the 1 in 19 that we'd been told before. So we were basically low risk, and the relief I felt from that, I can't explain the relief I felt. And it's not because he didn't have Down syndrome. That's not the reason. We would have loved our baby had he had Down syndrome, but it was because he wasn't poorly. You know, as far as we know, it is still only a screening. There is a 1 in 10,000 chance. He still could be, but I felt very reassured. And then she said, would you like to know his gender? Well, not his. Would you like to know their gender? And I was like, yes. And we were convinced that we were having a girl. She said, it's a boy, you're having a boy. So, yes, that was that. That was our good news. I really cannot rate Babybond highly enough. they were so kind and just what we needed. And it is expensive. I believe if you're in the US you can get it through insurance, but it was worth it. It was definitely worth it. Bloody dog. So everything was kind of plain sailing for a while after that. I was still sick, obviously, until I started, just one thing after another, I started feeling very bad pain in my tailbone. It was like when I sat down, it was almost as if my tailbone was too long. I didn't even realise I had a tailbone until that point. It felt like it was crunching. So I started having to take a cushion to work, and I got like an inflatable pile cushion just to try and take the pressure off. And I kind of just, hello boy, come on. I kind of just thought it was, normal, and put up with it until one day I woke up, hey mate, and the pain was in the front, and it was agony. It was like somebody had two hammers, the claws of the hammers, and pulling apart my pubic bone, if you can imagine. And again, I thought it was normal for a couple of days, but then I called my midwife and I said, this pain is hideous. It was hurting to walk, it was hurting especially to get out of bed, and the midwife said to me, I think you have SPD, or pelvic girdle pain, which is what it's called now. She was brilliant at that point. I was referred to physio immediately, and I am in physio now and I'm on crutches, which is another reason that I've been very, very quiet. So that's basically it so far. Nearly 31 weeks. I thought I'd update you all. More than anything else, I wanted to, anybody else who's going through a positive screen test for Down syndrome, when we found that out, I looked for people with similar stories. I didn't want to be told that there was no chance that he'd have Down syndrome, but I wanted to see that it was okay if he did. And that I think that's important, or, you know, just to feel like there were other people who might understand. And also, I'd never heard of this harmony test before, and I didn't really understand the enormity of having the screening in the first place. So my advice would be, if you are pregnant and you wouldn't care either way, don't have the test. That is everything. A bit of a weird one, but I wanted to explain, and I just wanted, you know, if there was anybody else out there who felt the same way, or was worrying about the same thing, then here I am. If you have any questions about Babybond in Hull, that's Hull in Chester, or anything like that, the SPD, the crutches, anything, then write me a comment in the description. I haven't really got anything more to say because I need to be more pregnant before I find out any more of these things. But if you have any questions, then just let me know and I will try and answer them for you. So yes, have a lovely Halloween.